Can you all hear me? No. Can you all hear me? This is rather cozy, isn't it? It's a sort of slightly like a sort of fireside chat, isn't it? I like the room. I like the colour. More on that in a moment. But anyway, it's a huge pleasure to welcome you here. My name is Philip Mould. I have a gallery in the West End of London which specialises, if you can specialise in 500 years of British art. It's in Pall Mall, and I've been an exhibitor here for 10 years. I have to say this particular fair has been a real delight for me, not least because there's a lot of sort of pent-up desire to get out over the last 2 or 3 years. And this desire, I think, has been felt by exhibitors and also some people who have visited, perhaps amongst yourselves. So that's me, and it's with enormous delight that I'd like to introduce you to Louise Wicksteed.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, Philip. Hi, my name's Louise, and I head up the design team at Sims Hilditch. I've been working within residential design since, I would say, around 2005. And I've been lucky enough to work on lots of big variety of homes, everything from very sleek London apartments right through to very traditional country houses and pretty much everything in between as well. For those of you that don't know Sims Hilditch, we are an interior design company. We are based in London and the Cotswolds, the beautiful Cotswolds. And we specialise in creating practical, thoughtful family homes, which are very rooted in quite a traditional English aesthetic, but also very much inspired by Swedish and European influences, which brings them a bit more up to date for today's standard of living. And we currently have projects all over, everywhere from Cornwall right up to Scotland, and of course lots in London as well. I work alongside the founder of the business, Sims Hilditch, who set the company up about 20 years ago. And we really pride ourselves on creating homes which actually reflect the individuality of our clients. And we start basically the process with obviously taking the client brief and understanding the space planning, and we don't leave until the last piece of artwork is hanging on the wall.
So there you are. And you can see why, as an art dealer, I was rather excited at the prospect, and you can see the results about 100 metres from here, less, 75 metres. The prospect of teaming up this year, because I have this belief about art. Although art is a wonderful thing, it is also about the context in which you encounter it, the means by which you absorb it, that is a crucial part of its functioning. In fact, of beauty, I think you can define beauty in many ways, but one of them is context. And so what I asked for with Sims Hilditch, and it was a slightly sort of intrepid request, but would you consider teaming up to create what I consider to be the perfect ambience to absorb the art of Philip Mould Limited, my company? 500 years of British art, from Tudor times with ruffs right up to Princess Diana that's on the stand. And the results you can judge for yourselves. And some of the purposes of today's little conversation is to pull out various themes, necessities, requirements, inclinations, intuitive wisdom that has developed in relation to making art work. How does it function? How do you get the best out of it? And I think it's probably worth starting with the question, and I think it's a question we all need to ask: why bother with art? What's the purpose of art? Why have it at home? And I think probably the best way of answering that is to show you how I did it. And it happened during lockdown that I developed a much closer relationship with the collection of odds and bods that I've got in the country. Here is a shot I took on my iPhone the other day of the inside of our house. Now, we have the great good fortune to live in a rather sort of ancient manor house in the middle of a field. Dates to about 1620. Low ceilings. A lot of atmosphere. We were there for a year and a half. And the art began to take on a sort of symbolic power that I hadn't really appreciated. And I see the purpose of paintings. And look at this room. You've got a cluster of portraits. You've got a bit of modern British on the right there. What you can see creeping in on the left-hand side is a Lucian Freud of a whippet. I'm a great lover of whippets, the dog whippet. And I think I plumbed the reason why I like it so much. These were portals outside my space. They allowed the eye, the imagination to travel. Landscapes, still lives, they were a crucial part of bringing oxygen and light and a vista beyond the enclosed space. Lockdown helped me appreciate that. As for the portraits, well, they became rather familiar. They were like people living in the house. They're all chosen for a reason. There's a William Dobson portrait there. William Dobson was a Civil War painter, painted in between battles during the Civil War, mud-splattered, blood-splattered subjects. And there's a portrait of a I think it's a sort of a groom. You've got one of Nell Gwyn's colleagues, Mould Davis, a couple of other things. Those faces looking in, and incidentally, you ought to just think, what is the purpose of art at its origins? Let's go to Roman times. They were windows. They were a means by which you got a space in your own space. What do I mean by that? Well, views of gardens. That's what you get in early Roman ruins. You can see a thrush on a tree and painted flowers inside the house to give you a feeling of looking out. And portraits in the 15th, 16th century, when they first started coming, when the fashion started coming, they were often, you remember these, leaning on a shelf, looking in. It's a sort of conceit, the idea of the subject joining you, looking through a window at you. So that's what I felt about my paintings. They all came alive in a curious sort of way. But Louise, that's a very sort of emotional, personal response. Give me a slightly more sort of technical reason as to why art works.
Well, I think the art actually plays a huge part in creating a narrative for every home. You know, every single home we work in is different, and that is because of the personality of the owner. And when we see their collection of artwork, for me, it's the artwork that actually creates the layering, that creates the interest. And this is why you get fantastically engaging houses, because every single client we work with brings a different piece of artwork to the table and different styles of artwork. And it's our job as designers to consider that artwork and then make it work in the context of the home. So, you know, whether we're looking at, you know, it's all about basically how we hang the artwork, how we light the artwork, and, you know, how the sort of context of the interior.
It shows you're interesting as well. I mean, art says more than a sofa, doesn't it?
It really does. It gives you the personality. And we talked about the hanging of the artwork. And how, you know, you can hang, I mean, I love your home, for example. It's very eclectic and very informal and laid back. And that's the amazing thing about artwork, is you can kind of hang it in lots of different ways. You can have quite formal hangs, and you can have more informal, loose hangs that are very expressive. And we were going to talk about the Bloomsbury, how expressive they were with the furniture and the art in that house.
So you raise an interesting point. So I see art also, and I think you do as well as an interior designer. And it's a tough job, you know, because art is about so much about the individual. You know, it's not, you know, dare I say it, it's more expressive than curtains and cushions.
Yes.
It's a form of autobiography. But what about when you inherit objects? You know, and we all inherit objects. Well, most of us do if we're lucky enough. What do we do then if they don't fit? Let's talk about brown furniture. You know, I've inherited a lot. And my definition of good taste, and it refers to art and living with art, is occasionally it's really good to have a lumpy problem. You know, I think the difference between, do you know what I consider to be the worst taste possible is that anodyne hotel interior, right? What I absolutely love is when someone has got something that's problematic, that they've had to work around. And in a curious sort of way, and if you take the Keatsian concept of beauty as truth, you know, there is a truthfulness about inherited objects. And how many people, throw up your hands, how many people here have been to Charleston in Sussex, the home of Vanessa Bell Duncan Grant? Okay, quite a few. Okay, keep that in mind. So half the room. For the other half, Charleston was a house that Vanessa Bell Duncan Grant and Clive Bell and a chap called Bunny Garnett took refuge in 1916, just up the road from Virginia Woolf. And it became their farmhouse, it became the home of the Bloomsbury Group, the country retreat of the Bloomsbury Group. That extraordinarily fizzy, intellectual, creative bunch of whom it was said they lived in squares, they painted in circles, and they loved in triangles. Going around that house, which is an experiential delight, and even though quite a lot of the furniture has been weeded, over 50 years, this highly creative, highly charged, progressive group of people decorated it, but they were middle class, upper middle class people. They had a bit of money. There were 3 servants there. They inherited furniture, and they worked around it. And one reason that the modernism, that the cutting edge excitement of that house works is because, and these are 2 not particularly good photographs, but just have a look, is the idea of them working around. You know, look at that walnut table in the middle, look at that armchair, look at the mirror, but then look at the radical nature of the fireplaces or the extreme colours of the wall. You know, to me, this is absolute delight. This is the high watermark of English traditional interior design. And it's the idea, it's coming back to this point, of living with, working around issues and problems. And if you've got inherited things, even if you don't like them, they have a story, try and work around them. Would you say that was fair?
Yes, very much so. So yeah, basically moving on from there, I think if we go on to the next slide,
yes,
if
of
that's
course.
Okay, sorry. Even though the Bloomsbury slides are very beautiful and colourful, we thought it might be nice to share a few examples of hanging artwork in some properties we've worked with. And actually, the Bloomsbury has such an interesting story behind it. And for us, as I mentioned earlier, every house has a story. And as soon as you cross the threshold, that kind of journey begins. And actually, we're talking about the way that we hang art. It's almost like you can sort of hang differently in different spaces. So in the entrance and hallways, you might want to have more impressive pieces because you're kind of creating a sense of drama as soon as people come into the house. And here on the left, we have some more traditional kind of landscapes and very serious portraiture in this beautiful country house. But then as you progress up into the more informal areas, such as bedrooms and hallways, the layering of the artwork is much softer, it's a bit more eclectic. And I think that's the fun thing, is you can use art to kind of weave this story throughout. And actually, as we move on to the next slide, you can see how different houses react differently to artwork. So in the previous slide, we had quite a formal, traditional house. But here, this is more of a farmhouse type setting. It's got a completely different set of materials. And actually, the artwork itself then responds to that. And we have a mid-century abstract landscape painting, and it's just kind of leaning up in the bookcase. It hasn't been very seriously hung in the room. And it creates a beautiful backdrop and sort of layers in with the artwork and the objet and the books. And on the right-hand side, we've got a beautiful pair of bird prints. So we're layering up different styles of art as well, rather than just sticking, for example, to painting. We're looking at mixing different mediums, which creates a lovely layering effect. And lastly, another example we were going to share is just where we've really used colour to showcase the artwork. And again, the next slide is a very formal, grand dining room. And in this case, exactly as Philip was mentioning, the owner had inherited a lot of these artworks and found them to be very serious and quite kind of, very old-fashioned in a way. Obviously, most of us would be very glad to inherit something like this, but it was all about how we could make those actually, sort of contrast with the walls, and actually by going for quite a powerful, punchy colour, which we spent a very long time searching for, went through many, many different types of blue. But in the end, the actual vibrancy of this blue, we felt contrasted really beautifully with the very serious kind of oil, the colours of the oils in the paintings. And actually it provided quite a nice kind of like dynamic to the seriousness of the dining room. And I think it's really interesting because when someone does inherit a piece of art, they don't always love that piece of art, do they? And in fact, they want to keep hold of it because they have a kind of emotional connection to it, but at the same time, they may not love the colours. And up until recently, I thought it was a crime to actually then do anything to that painting. But having talked with Philip, there seems to be some other options.
I think you can. And you say you've talked very eloquently about colour and background colour. And also, I noticed these pictures beautifully lit. We're going to come to lighting in a moment. But the picture itself can sometimes require, not always, because I think lighting can do the job, can require cleaning. Varnish, particularly old varnishes, organic varnishes made from the sap of various trees, it degrades, it ages, it goes yellow, and the yellowness then gives way to brownness, and sometimes a picture that hasn't had its varnish changed, that has one of these early sort of mastic varnishes, can end up almost opaque. It can be rather beautifully opaque. You can light it, but it disappears from view. And these are the instances when cleaning a picture can be transformative. And I want to give you an example. So if I put up this was a picture we recently acquired. We had a good idea that it was a very high-quality Elizabethan portrait. But this picture doesn't even show just how profoundly dirty it was. We felt that it was almost certainly a work, but couldn't be absolutely sure, by a gentleman painter who came from the north to London to paint Elizabeth I and the court, called George Gower. And we didn't know the woman, but the woman certainly had a sort of proud and attractive appearance, and also potentially a rather modern one. But the varnish, this dark varnish that I was talking about, was stopping us both apprehending her humanity, but more important still, recognizing the necessary strokes of the artist. Could this be a rare and beautiful work by George Gower? Some of the best moments in my life as a second-hand picture dealer has been standing over the shoulder of my restorer as gently the solvents begin to work, as layer upon layer of accumulated grime begins to give way, and beneath, rather like a sort of hatching mayfly, a portrait or a face can emerge. And so it was with this woman in Jermyn Street with my restorer for these type of paintings, Becky Gregg, that this happened. And this will give you an idea of it halfway through. And it was a thrilling halfway through because things were beginning to change dramatically. The face, although it looks rather sort of white in here, was beginning to show contours and subtlety. The eyes were beginning to sparkle. The jewelry was taking on that rather weird, surreal, three-dimensional effect, some trompe d'oeil effect that Tudor jewelry can do. And by the time it had all been cleaned and framed, we're coming to framing in a moment, here it is. It turned out to be the best condition, and I kid you not, Tudor portrait that we have ever handled. How it managed to survive, possibly partly because no one hadn't made an attempt to clean it, is a mystery. It had been kept out of the damp. It had been kept out of the sun. It had been kept beyond reach of restorers. And this crystal clear face, which in a sense is a face now of almost any century, and unquestionably the work of George Gower, one of his greatest works, came to light. And that was purely a result of removing these accumulated layers of varnish, and is an example of how cleaning, when you inherit a picture, back to our theme about living at home, can sometimes work. But it was miraculous. And you're looking at a face that Elizabeth I could have looked at in a painted form like this because of its extraordinary condition. And if you want to have a look at it, it's about 75 meters up the road on the right, and you can have a look afterwards. So that's a cleaning story, one way of coping with things. But what about the outside of a picture? What about framing?
Yeah, I mean, you're the expert on this, so I'm looking to you.
Oh, thanks a lot, mate. Okay.
But I'm very interested because we were talking about it a bit beforehand, and I'm really excited you're going to show us some examples. Also, I've got a few questions for you afterwards, actually, about the framing.
Right, so framing. Framing is crucial. Framing is as important as the clothes you wear in what you're saying about yourself. You can have different sorts of clothes, but you can get them badly wrong. Also, you can orbit with the right clothes if you get it right. And I probably spend more time thinking about frames and how to frame a picture than almost anything else these days, particularly with modern British paintings. And on that subject, I'd like to introduce you to a woman who's come out today. She's come out today having come out in the sort of court sense in the mid-1920s. And her name is Viscountess Phyllis de Janzé. Now, this is a picture done by Ambrose McAvoy in 1926. Ambrose McAvoy was, incidentally, it's huge. It sort of fills this wall, and it's on the stand up there, up the road. I don't want you to think this is an advertisement for my stand up the road, by the way. And indeed, the wonderful interior design that you can see there, more on that in a moment. However, it just happens you're here, so, okay. This picture, lost in the States, surfaced in lockdown. There were some wonderful opportunities to buy things in lockdown. This was one of them. This is arguably, and it needs to be seen, it's a bit small on the screen here, arguably the most risk-taking and exciting traditional society portrait done in the 1920s. Easily inflamed to anger, with a wicked temper, always in love, followed by a suite of adoring men, the first woman in high society to wear short skirts. Phyllis de Janzé was quite a girl. And she turned heads, wonderful aquamarine eyes, wonderful profile. People basically described her as the most exciting woman of the period, just in visual terms. And boy, doesn't she know it. Look at the way she twists and plays. This is playing to the theatre. Ambrose McAvoy knew how to do it as well. He had coloured lights, green, purple, blue, orange beneath, of the type used in the theatre or used in pageants at the period where people would stand on stage in order to fill that dress full of light. If you look at it, it's sort of proto-expressionism. You know, you've got these mad strokes that he would scrape off the paint actually halfway through or quarter of the way through, and then with the happy accidents that were left, he would start again and go in different directions. So this was a really ambitious, artistically sort of frontier-pushing society portrait of a daring woman. How the hell do you frame it? How do you capture all of that? How do you tame her as much as anything else? And it came with no frame, came from the States. It's terribly exciting, incidentally, when you buy something in the States and it arrives in one of those wooden boxes and you sort of get it sort of taken open with one of those drills, sort of screwdrivers, and then you take away the polystyrene, and then that face looks back at you that you've only known from a screen, you know, as she did. It was also very dirty at that point, so we had to sort of clean it. So we had to think, okay, what are we going to do? So the first idea was, and I'm going to sort of throw it open to you, and this is not necessarily the right answer, but I want to show you some of the thought processes that go on in framing, which, as I say, is absolutely crucial. So the first idea was, should we go completely modernist? You know, should we treat it like a sort of Lucian Freud? You know, big chunk of nice, bright white. A certain type of home, that could look good. But to my mind, you know, with all of that fusion of light and that sort of, that jazz age, you know, this is the roar in the roaring 20s going on here, it just didn't quite work. So why don't go for the time-honoured solution? A nice 19th century gilt frame, but it just looked boring. Incidentally, my framer, I've got this wonderful guy called Glenroy who does these frames, and he, a bit like, apparently you could do this hairdressers, you can see what your style, you know, and so he does these things for me. So we tried that. It was just boring. It was conventional. This is something you might get around a Lawrence or a mid-19th century Victorian oil, or you could even get around a late 18th century picture. But, you know, and of course this picture is about continuity. You know, you see things from the past, but it wasn't right. It wasn't right. Then I thought, well, look, okay, it's an elaborate painting. It's an important painting. It's a £250,000 picture. Why don't go for the sort of impressionist handling? You know, this is what you get around Renoirs. You know, you get around sort of what I would describe as trophy paintings from the late 19th, early 20th century. Possibly, but I felt that the activity in the picture was slightly competing with the surrounding. So then I thought, well, how about if you let the painting do the work? Why don't you try a 17th century frame of a sort of Velázquez type, or even a Rembrandt type? And in a funny sort of way, I quite liked it, but it was a bit funereal and severe. So I thought, well, how about if we add just a little bit of gilt around the edge? Now, is that beginning to work? For my taste, it was beginning to, but it was still a little bit hard, a little bit generic. And then I had an amazing breakthrough. I found a painting, the original frame that was round a painting of Diana Cooper by Ambrose McAvoy, another society figure of the same time, which he had designed. What a gift. And it was the same, getting close to the solution I was coming to. And this is the frame that we thus copied and had around it. Now, you're going to say, why? What are you doing? I would never normally take a risk of putting an Art Deco frame like that around with those roundels. But I promise you it works. And it's because it's the artist's solution. It was something to do with the colors. Go and have a look. And it's letting the painting do the work, but it's also saying, hey, look at me. Oh, and incidentally, I've got a love affair with silver frames now, so much so that the gallery now won't even let me put silver around frames. I think silver is the new, around pictures. I think silver is the new gold. And another idea for this, incidentally, and doesn't that look beautiful, is another way of framing these things. So, a bit like to the clothes analogy, you can wear a trouser suit or a great, lovely floral dress or whatever.
Because I was going to ask, is there only ever one frame for a painting, or do you feel that multiple frames can work?
I think this silver frame, shows that multiple frames can work. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about complementing the picture, giving an idea of its art historical significance, finding how it could be accepted and habilitated into a modern space. Some clients probably wouldn't want it, but yes, your question is such a pertinent one. There is quite a lot of variety, but in the end, I think there are certain solutions. And I think the one that we ended up with, believe it or not, is going to be the most comfortable. And there's something to do with art historical integrity about a frame like that as well, because we know that the artist designed that frame or was happy with it. But give me your view when you see it. And back to your point again, silver. Isn't silver lovely? And just give you an example of silver. So on the left, this is by Nina Hamnet, a female artist who danced nude on the tables in Paris in the 1920s. A very important female artist who's slightly sort of lost out, but is now coming back. She was daring, risk-taking, wonderful woman in so many ways, a great artist. And this picture we recently bought with a gilt frame on it. On the left, we took the frame off and I put a silver frame on the right. Now, you could say both frames, in answer to your question, work. But for my mind, silver every day. Right, so that deals with frames. Anything more on frames?
No, I think we're going to move on to some hanging.
Oh, yes, hanging.
So once you've got the artwork, you've restored it, and you've got the most beautiful frame, then obviously how do you then decide how to hang the artwork? And if we move on to the next slide, thank you. Obviously different spaces present different challenges for how to hang artwork. And you've got a very formal approach here. This is actually a double height space that we were working on for a client who not only inherited some beautiful portraiture, but also had a rather fetching portrait painted of themselves as well, which you can see over the fireplace there. So in this instance, we're really looking at the balance and the proportion of the space. And as I mentioned earlier, when we're designing a space, we automatically are thinking about sight lines and viewpoints, about symmetry and how people are going to experience a space. And I think we didn't really get a chance to touch on lighting, but obviously, without the right lighting, the best painting in the world can just get lost in a room. You almost don't even realise that it's there. And so we're big, I think, coming from Philip's world and my world, we both feel like lighting is one of the most important things that you can do for your art.
If you want one message to take away, light well. damn transformative.
And especially in old houses, you know, you need to think about it. If you are undertaking a refurbishment, for example, you want to get enough lighting in at the start so you don't have to go back and open up any of those walls. So you were saying...
Oh, I know. I mean, so always put in more lights than you need. It doesn't matter. You don't have to put a bulb in them, you know, in the socket or whatever. Don't worry about it. But always do it, because I promise you, you'll want them in the end.
Yeah.
So, and then there's nothing worse than having to excavate your ceiling, having painted it, you know, or put, you know, flashing and wiring up the walls and stuff like that after you've put wallpaper on or something. You know, so do it early.
Yeah. And normally within a house, there seems to be natural places to hang artwork. So we tend to wire and put little clock points which can be hidden behind the artwork. And then you can get these fantastic picture lights. And actually the picture lights can now be tailored to fit the size of the painting. So you don't get any bleed outside the painting. It can actually illuminate the whole of the artwork itself. And another thing that we were talking about is actually artwork doesn't necessarily stay in the same position in your home, does it? You know, just because you've hung something in one room to start with, after a couple of years, you might want to move that around. And we were saying it's really important to actually try artwork in different rooms and experience it in different places.
Oh, I couldn't agree. Back to context, there's a sort of, you know, in our collection, there's a slight sort of choreography. They sort of dance around the house in different places. Every couple of years, you appreciate them, you notice them more. They say different things.
Yeah.
You know, they respond to their context.
And in fact, I not only move artwork around, I also move my furniture around constantly, which drives my husband absolutely bananas. But anyway, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
So actually, if we flick on to the next slide.
So yeah, but you know, this group hanging, so
Yes,
I mean, cluster hanging, do people here do that, put more than one picture on a wall at the same time? Yes? No, it's because it's really interesting, and I think it's becoming, I think Koufax and Fowler originally introduced that idea. I mean, tell us what you think about that aesthetically, because you've got a few examples here.
Yeah, well, I think this is another example of a property that we worked on. You can see the aesthetic is so completely different. And I actually really love the sort of informality of the artwork in these pictures. So actually, it's just pieces that the owners collected that they really love. They're a bit smaller in scale, but actually you can have them in every room, you know, even in a bathroom. We've done a nice shelf detail, and the artwork's just very informally leaning up against the shelf, which is great if you want to move things around. But equally, the right-hand side was a different room in the same house, and they had just done a very informal kind of collage, which we worked with them on, the sort of placing of the artwork. But there was a kind of theme to the artwork. They were all beautiful, very softly painted Swedish landscapes, and actually there was kind of a theme to their collection, so they sat together quite beautifully. But yeah, I think it just feels quite eclectic.
Yeah, it does. It's a sort of scrapbook. It can be also autobiography, can't it? And incidentally, you know, you think, oh God, you'll have to take the measure out, you know, work it all out. Don't bother. Absolutely no need. Just bang one up on the wall, and then a space comes up on the right, bang another one in there. Don't try and be too prescriptive about it. You know, think like a flock of birds, and then they're up there, and, you know, you might have to pull the odd nail out and redo it, but that's what you do. And it can be done quickly and painlessly as the dog's watching you, you know.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're too serious about art, and we
Yes.
spend too long thinking about it. And actually, in a way, like you say, just get it up on the wall and kind of live with it. And then if it's not working, you can move it.
Yes, exactly. There's too much piety towards art,
Yes.
you know.
I'm guilty of that.
But talking of piety, when you came to do our stand, so 3 years ago we had this conversation, then COVID put pay to it. But for 5 or 6 months, we've been working on how to. So what you'll see on our stand, which is different from I think the majority, is we've created a room set where the art, there's 500 years of art, functions. And we've had so many conversations. The first conversation was about background colours, which is, you know, as we all know, a painful one. But I want you to give me some of the rationale as to how we ended up. So this is the stand.
So when we started to work on the stand again, obviously it's been 3 years in the making, so it was going to happen a couple of years ago, but then we were lucky enough, myself and some of my team at Sims Hilditch, we went down to visit Philip at his gallery, and he gave us a wonderful tour of the gallery and talk through some of the artwork. So I got to actually go up and experience the artworks close up. And obviously the thing that I noticed is, wow, there's quite a broad spectrum of artwork that we're dealing with here, because it's everything from Tudor portraits, which are rather serious, and the colours are muted but rich, I would say, in beautiful oil colours, right up to more expressionist paintings, which are quite colourful. And you've got still lifes, there's portraiture, so how are we going to make this all hang together on the stand? And we felt, because there was no natural light inside, because we were in an exhibition, that a beautiful, rich colour would actually really enhance the paintings and allow them to kind of come off the wall. And so we consciously made the decision that we would go with a dark interior, which is always quite, quite interesting. And so we went through all the colours, didn't we? So we knew we wanted this rich colour, so we were like, should we go with a classic navy? You know, it's classic. And you can't go wrong with navy, love navy. But no, this wasn't working. And then we tried some beautiful deep greens. And eventually I was really drawn actually to particularly the lady you were mentioning earlier, the Gower, and I love the kind of the browns. And I think brown is like a colour that's underused in interiors. And so we looked at this amazing aubergine eventually, which we settled on. And it's got lots of different tones within it. It's kind of got browns and then warmth with the kind of pinky red tones. And we were originally going to paint the stand 2 colours, but we effectively decided, no, let's just go for it. 1 bold colour. And then we introduced a series of archways to create viewpoints. And hopefully, you know, if you haven't seen the stand and you get a chance to go and see it, you'll see that we worked quite hard to frame paintings and to create a sense of arrival on the stand. So you have these beautiful archways, and I think they work really well in terms of sort of breaking up the wall and giving depth to the artwork itself.
It's been a huge success. We've absolutely loved it. And, you know, back to what I was saying earlier, 500 years of British art, you know, how does a ruff work next to the Viscountess de Jansé's dress, you know, a Tudor ruff? And you know, where I think you've really scored is with the wall colour, which a lot of people would say they wouldn't risk because it's too dark. But no, we've now come to the conclusion, having lived with this for 4 or 5 days, that the answer to life is aubergine. Although I was slightly disappointed when I walked in here and I saw this is sodding aubergine as well.
They're on brand this year.
Yeah. So that's all brands. But so no, it's been great fun working with that. Also, just the comfort. These, I mean, at the risk of saying something like stupidly straightforward and obvious, you don't often have really comfortable sofas at Masterpiece or when you're at an art fair, and just sinking into these. You know, this is refuge for me. This is sanctuary. You know, particularly after 8 or 9 hours of saying hello to people and suffering from lockjaw. Or the worst thing you can suffer from is when you run out of adjectives after day 4 or 5. For an art dealer, that's the worst thing that can happen. But these sofas, they are marvellous. They are, you know, they do it for me. And then back also the lighting, T&M Lighting, fantastic group of people. Incidentally, they do every type of lighting you can imagine. But they've been rather sort of transformative, haven't they? You use them, don't you?
The lighting is absolutely stunning on the stand because each painting is beautifully lit, you know, exactly to the dimensions of every piece. So the piece almost comes off the wall at you. In fact, we don't have the view the other way, but the portrait in the oval, it almost looks 3-dimensional with the painting that's on it.
Yes.
So with the lighting, sorry. But we actually worked with some British craftspeople to create the furniture on the stand, which is part of our Sims Hilditch collection. But I think the important thing to say about the fabrics and the furnishings, I felt because the space was so opulent with this incredible rich walls and all of the artwork, the gilt, framing, etc., that actually I just wanted to bring, you know, a sense of sort of comfort and natural materials to kind of earth the whole scheme. So actually we used lots of beautiful natural linens, and we worked with a British company called Fermoy, who we worked with on all the fabrics, so the sofa fabric and the beautiful striped fabrics on the curtains. And they're all on a beautiful, grounded, very natural, earthy, kind of chunky linen. And I think it contrasts so well with the opulence of the paintings. And again, just putting a really natural sisal rug down. It's not competing with what's happening on the walls, but hopefully enhancing what's there. And I think it's hopefully a good example of where the interior can give context to the art, provide the right backdrop for the art, so that actually when the two things come together, it creates a really inviting, you know, calming space to be in.
So much so that I don't want to go home in the evenings. No, but thank you. You've really pulled it off. I'm so thrilled, and I've seen a lot of sort of different attempts to make art work in this slightly artificial environment, and yeah, you killed it. So have you ever bought art yourself? For your own desire, to live with. Put the day job aside. Something you've.
Well, actually, funnily enough, after I came to see, so when I first met Philip, they had a Bloomsbury exhibition on at the gallery. And I thought, wow, I really love this. And I did a bit of reading up about Charleston, and I loved how expressive it was, how colourful it was. And I was in Tetbury. I don't know if any of you know Tetbury, but there's a lot of kind of art and antique places there. And basically my favourite thing to do on a Saturday, if I can persuade my husband to look after the kids, is go off for a day in Tetbury, looking around all the art and antique shops. And I found a little portrait of a lady. And I was just really drawn to it. And often I'm drawn to paintings, but I walk away because I think, oh, it's too expensive, or will I really like it in 5 years' time? But actually on this instance, I seized the moment, and I bought this painting of a very sort of scholarly, we decided, 1920s lady with this beautiful colour palette, which I felt very drawn to. And yeah, it's hanging in my house.
It's a big moment when you do commit, isn't it? And just saying, I'm going to live with that. I'm going to take it home. I'm going to see how it works. And I'm glad you did that. And you felt, but because you slightly opened your eyes to the Bloomsbury, to the 30s. Yeah. Incidentally, the 30s, I hated the 30s about 30, 40 years ago. It reminded me too much of sort of slightly difficult aunts, lived for that period. Now it's sufficiently far away to be romantic.
Yeah.
And that hairstyle of that portrait, we haven't got an image of it, but I can see why you liked it.
And in fact, I was wanting to ask you, because, now I've got you here on the stage, what do you look for in a piece of artwork? Because that's the really fascinating thing. Obviously, you see so much artwork in your career, and you have to decide what you're going to bring to your wonderful gallery. So how do you connect with certain art?
So I used to have hanging at home the odd picture that I really loved, that I absolutely adored, and also a group of the pictures from the gallery which, for some reason or other, I couldn't sell. They just wouldn't sell. No one wanted them. And curiously, I put them on the wall and asked people if they could tell the difference between the pictures that nobody wanted and the things that I love. And they always got it wrong. And then gradually, as business became more successful and life moved on, I managed to sort of weed out these things. Incidentally, if you have a portrait which you haven't sold for 3 or 4 years, it has a way of looking at you. You don't want so, and I managed to turf all of those out, and I just have paintings that I love. What's happened is, as I've got older, my taste has changed, and it sounds rather superficial, but I've become drawn more and more to nature, to 30s. I love the modernism and a little bit of abstraction, but the avant-garde, the way it treats nature in a pre-agriculturally intense world. So I love Cedric Morris, who's my favourite artist probably. I've named my dog after him. He's the plantsman artist. He mixed paint in the same way that he mixed pollen and created, I think he named 96 different irises that he bred. But he had this extraordinary colour range and this capacity to wrestle subjects to the ground and do interesting things with them. So, I mean, it'd be a bit like a chef. If you ask them what their favourite food is, they start scratching their head. It's often sometimes to do with where I am, what I'm doing in life, whether it's in the country, whether I'm in London. It's really difficult.
Funnily enough, those irises, we'd already decided to paint the stand, and we'd done the design, we'd done the colour, hadn't we? And then we saw that irises painting, which again, it's on the outside of the stand. It is the most beautiful painting of flowers I think I've ever seen. I absolutely love it. I adore it. It's just so, interesting as a piece, and the layering of the irises and the colours. But it looks like it was actually made for the stand, doesn't it?
Yes, it's lucky.
It's almost like we planned it, but we didn't.
And what about things that we all have paintings that we wish we'd bought, or opportunities that perhaps we've passed by?
Yeah.
I know one thing I still dream about, which was I was offered by an art dealer about 25 years ago for £12,000 2 eggs on a plate by David Hockney. And it was done with wax crayons, like he does with some green. And he found all sorts of colours in the egg that you knew were there, but you can never normally see. But it took David Hockney to find. And also the way they sat on the plate, you felt their weight. He managed to define their eggness, And I thought long and hard and then passed it by. And still at night, occasionally, I'm awoken with the thought of those eggs humming on a plate, which I never bought. Which just shows, I suppose, don't pass these opportunities by. We're going to throw this open. We've got 10 to 15 minutes for some questions, which we'd be delighted to try and answer about, how you make art work at home. Would anyone like to? Yes, ma'am. You'll get a microphone. Yeah. I don't think it's on.
You haven't really spoken much about sculpture.
Sorry, I can't hear. Can you put it next to your mouth? That's it. Hooray.
You have spoken a lot about two-dimensional art, but not really spoken about living with sculpture. In your drawing room at home, you had a couple of sculptures, I noticed, but you spoke about living with the people that you had come to feel were people in your portraits at home, but the actual sculptures that are in your drawing room, you didn't express how you relate to them.
Very good question. And sculpture is, if you can get it right, is terrific because it gives you something to do in the middle of a room. It's a lighting challenge sometimes. The scale of it is in sort of middle area in a room, or it can dwarf it. Can add so much fun and so much excitement. But the problem with sculpture, particularly big pieces, is they take floor space. They're quite self-centered things. Art, two-dimensional art on a wall is illusion. Sculpture is reality. Two-dimensional illusion is what basically, of a three-dimensional subject, is what flat art is about. And so you've got to dance around it, Dogs might lift its leg on it, might fall on a toe or a child or something. And you've got to light it. You've got to light it from every corner, You've got to walk around it. Or am I just being a bit wet?
Well, I think, it's nice to have a variety of different types of art. And I think that's what, makes homes really interesting when you have that. I think the Georgians did it quite well because they used to create beautiful niches in the walls.
Yes,
like
they had more space, of course, than us.
Yeah, which would frame beautiful urns or pottery or more contemporary sculpture. But I think there are certain places where sculptures do sit really well.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
No. But what's your feeling about it?
Well, personally, I think it does evoke something different, something three-dimensional. I think you relate to it differently. I think it has, in a funny way, a completely different vibe.
Yes,
so I think it's quite important to have sculpture and paintings.
Yeah, yes. I think probably the right. Hands up people who have sculpture here. Yeah, quite a lot. Hands up people who have really big sculpture here in there. Yes, it's one or two. Because I think in the sense, if you're going to do it, why not do it? Why not just put some, I've got a Richard III carved out a piece of wood in my dining room in the country, a big thing. But that's sort of, thanks for that question, though. Let's think three-dimensional. We're being rather two-dimensional in our conversation. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Would anyone like any other thoughts on that? Yes.
Thank you for that. I was wondering about, just drawing on your Bloomsbury theme, inheriting old objects and making them work with newer, more contemporary pieces. What's your feeling on that?
Well, I think you raise an interesting point about sustainability as well. I think we have almost an obligation to use the things that we inherit. I think that goes beyond the aesthetic. And although, in a sense, the aesthetic and also the ethical come together, I love the idea of inheriting and working around the problems of the past. I like the feeling of continuity, but you've got to be quite artistically aerobic to pull it off well. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I think one thing that I love to do as well is to collect actually old traditional gilt frames, but then hang a more contemporary piece of art within them. So I think you can be quite playful, because the frames in themselves are actually, a lot of them are works of art, and they're beautiful objects. So that can be quite a fun thing to do. But I love contemporary art as well. So I think, again, it's all about that playfulness of being quite brave in how you hang things, and actually why can't you have something quite old next to something quite new?
Yes, I love the idea of repurposing old frames. That can be great fun. And also, I don't know how many artists there are in the room, but if you do a sort of squiggle, a little bit of colour, observe something quite usefully in the corner of the room or whatever, and produce a work of art, even if you're not an artist, try putting a wonderful gilt frame around it. It suddenly functions. And you're thinking, oh, yeah, absolutely. So what I love is, I love the way a frame adds grammar to things, even to these inconsequential doodles that I've done from time to time. So yeah, frames are great fun. They're great fun. We actually have in our kitchen in the country, I just have a beautiful 17th century frame, empty frame, sitting against a wall with some Ed Bulmer yellow painted wall. And it just looks absolutely gorgeous. And there's nothing inside except the wall behind. But then you can impose in that portal whatever image you feel like, with your head, with your imagination. Any other questions? Yes. We're going to give you a microphone just so we can. I'm sorry.
Sorry, there you are. You had the image of art in the bathroom. How do you deal with the humidity of that?
That's a good question. I would say you perhaps don't want to put your highest value works of art in the bathroom for that reason. But a lot of bathrooms, sometimes you might just have a freestanding bath where you're not creating the same amount of steam and humidity. But yeah, of course, you do have to be careful. But you can actually get prints framed with a special backing that they put on the back of those frames to actually protect the print from humidity as well. So that can be another way of looking at artwork in the bathroom, is to do more of a glass framed print as opposed to an open artwork. But most of the time, if it's something you maybe source which is not super expensive, that you're not super precious about, it can hang in the bathroom and it doesn't really affect it, does it?
Or just have cold baths.
Don't run the shower for too long.
I mean, kitchens, you see, the kitchen has now become one of the main hanging spaces in modern living life, because we eat there, we hang out there, and there's all sorts of cooking smells and things that go around. But basically speaking, art, dare I say this, is rather more robust than a lot of people will give you to believe. And just by putting glass over something can protect it a lot. Heat, direct light, proximity to an open fire, those are things you need to worry about. But basically, you can hang a lot in a kitchen and get away with it. And I think kitchens are fabulous places for that. Well, thanks for asking the question. Yes, madam. We'll just get you the microphone.
I have a collection, or I've collected over the years, old tiles. And I've never really known how to hang them or display them. What suggestions do you have for that?
Oh, that's a good one for me. Wow, that's quite a challenge. Do you have any kind of feeling of where you might like to hang them in the house? Like, do you see them in a certain place, i.e. kitchen or possibly the kitchen? Possibly outside.
Well, can I? Because we've had this issue.
Yeah.
My wife had a collection of tiles, nice tiles, and guess where we put them and where they work brilliantly? In the greenhouse on the floor. No, yeah. But it's sort of, because you want a sort of hard floor. I mean, they're not great tiles, but they're sort of 1920s, 30s tiles. You go into the greenhouse and there they are on the floor.
Are they floor tiles or wall tiles, would you say?
They were probably wall tiles, but
right.
The other problem I have is we move around quite a lot, so I wanted to actually
Yeah.
permanently somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've seen these, people will frame them. It depends, you see, the problem is when you cement tiles to a wall, often they'll get damaged. But there are ways of doing it. You could probably blue tack them or what have you. But why not just create a sort of, put 6 or 8 up. Try and find some adhesive to do it.
It depends how much money you want to spend. But in fact, there's a stand at Masterpiece. They've got some beautiful ceramic 3-dimensional flowers, and they're framed in box frames. So you could actually mount the tile in a slightly bigger box frame, and then that could be taken with you.
Yeah, that's good.
And actually, you could be a bit playful with the frames, or you could keep it more regular and hang them in a beautiful grid. I mean, although I love eclectic hangs, I also like a bit of form and order as well. So I love to do a grid layout. And there's an example of that, I think just down here, yeah. So maybe go and have a look at that.
But tiles, they're very enduring. You don't need to worry about light. You don't need to worry that much about heat, except extreme heat. And you can wash them and clean them off. You can't do that with a watercolor. So you've actually got quite a lot more versatility with tiles, particularly if they're decorative. And also, if the whole makes a better design than the single ones, you can play. I rather envy you. Any other questions? Yes, madam. Hold on, we're just going to get you a... Right.
This is a question for Louise, really. I understand that artwork is normally the last thing that's hung in a space, but I wonder if she's ever based a whole space or a whole room around an artwork.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that happens more often than you might think. So clients tend to fall into two camps. You either get someone who wants to start again because it's a new property for them. It may not be new architecturally, but it might be a new property for them, and therefore they want a sort of clean slate. And so they're quite open to us advising on the artwork. But more often than not, people have collected things over the years, things they've got an emotional connection to, things that they love, and it constantly amazes me, like the variation of artwork that people come to us with. And it's not all to my taste, but my job is to obviously make that work within the interior. And I think, if you've got an amazing English landscape, you can actually pull the colours of the scheme from the painting. So it might be that you take contrasting purples and greens, or, opposites on the colour wheel always look really, really beautiful. And actually that can give quite a sort of pulled together scheme, so it feels quite coherent and it does give context. But equally, I don't like it to be too matchy-matchy, because then I think it wouldn't have the kind of fluidity. But yeah, that happens a lot, that we work with artwork as a starting point. I think it creates like a really nice story to start with. And actually, it's really good for clients to have that thread. Because often in the world of design, you can start in one place and end up somewhere quite different, and they might forget actually where they started. And by pulling it all back to a painting, it actually, it keeps us tight in terms of the process.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So I'm just thinking about the conversation I've had with you and some of the conversations we've had today. But I think what's very important with the work of art is just bang it up on the wall and try it out. And the thing is, art is a great work of art, particularly a great work of art. The artist lets go and the art begins to function on its own. And that can function just because of the process of creating art, like music does. You put one note next to another. You can never completely predict how those strokes are going to work, but they do. And also, a space, a place, can create and give you thoughts about a painting that you hadn't imagined. Don't be too reverential. Bang a nail in the wall. Yeah, it might leave a mark, but risk it. And actually, I rather like marks in the wall. It shows a creative past. And put it up. And it's wonderful to see. And you're saying some interesting things about moving the art or moving the furniture, out of reach of your husband or whatever. But try it. Try these things. Work around them. And also bear in mind that thought about art being a way out. It's a portal for the imagination, and great art can really do that. It also brings something in. It brings light and it brings pleasure. There's a meditative quality to art. I've got that very much from perhaps I'm being over literal here, but the flower paintings of Cedric Morris, but they make me smile. And I love something which I can smile at, but also feel in awe of. And great art it's a magical trick. It's a work of illusion. And it's great fun. And, just roll up your sleeves.
Yeah, I mean, it can be controversial to say this, but I don't think a house is ever finished. Because we're constantly changing and evolving and collecting things, and therefore that's constantly impacting on your home and how you live your life. So I think go with that.
And which is why I like the bathroom question. It's a great place to have a bit of art. Perhaps it's prints. I grew up at a school where we had in the dining room, we had Picasso's Guernica, a huge sort of cardboard cutout of it, because of cardboard reproduction, in front of the milk machine, where the milk was always sour. But this picture, and I remember just sort of thinking about it and looking at it, and it just sort of percolated. And then And then there's a place where we went for our detention, and there was a John Constable picture of Salisbury Cathedral. So I slightly associate it with pain, but at least I saw it, you know, and it worked, and its shadow has remained with me. I mean, art, it works in curious ways, doesn't it? Thank you so much for coming here today. Our hour is up. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for contributing as well. Louise and I, we've had a great fun, haven't we?
We did. Thank you very much.
Thank you
everyone.
very much.